What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and today I'm back with another video. Following on from a video where I talked about my top 10 most wanted Chris Van Vliet interviews of 2021, I thought today, and I mentioned that Vince McMahon, the owner of WWE, was one of my top interviews that I would like to see Chris do. I thought today I would do a video talking about 10 questions I would love to ask Vince McMahon if I was ever lucky enough to interview him. So let's get into it. With number 10 being, does he view AEW as competition? For those of you that don't know, AEW is another wrestling promotion run by Tony Khan, who, by the way, guys, we are also going to get into later in another video when I talk about 10 questions I would love to ask Tony Khan. So yeah, I would just be very curious to know, does Vince view them as competition? Does he think that WWE is too big to have any legitimate competition? If he does view them as competition, does he think they can put him out of business? Does he believe that, and if not, does he believe that they can be strong enough to be a number 2 company? Etc. There's just loads of questions you could go down if you were going to go down the AEW route. Number 9 is, were you ever scared you would go out of business? We obviously know, guys, fans of a certain age, not me specifically, but fans of a certain age know that in the 90s, Vince McMahon's main competition was the WCW, also known as World Championship Wrestling, during the Monday Night Wars, with the end, because you had WWE Raw on one channel on a Monday, and you had Monday Night Nitro from WCW on another time. So I would on another channel at the same time. So I would just be very curious to know if Vince was ever scared that WCW had that much of a stranglehold on his company because they were beating them in the ratings for, I think it's 83 weeks. If he was ever scared that they would fully go out of business. Or even before that. Was he scared during the 80s and the steroid trial and other trials and tribulations? Was he ever scared that they would go out of business because of them? We'll obviously get into the steroid trial and bits like that a bit later. But we'll get to that. But yeah, was he ever scared that the company would go out of business? And if he was scared, what was his plan for either resurrecting the company or, after the company went out of business, what would he have done with himself? Number 8 is, why don't you like tag team wrestling? It seems, and I could be wrong, but Vince McMahon himself hates tag teams, like when 2 wrestlers are fighting against another 2 wrestlers. Because he will just split up a random tag team, he'll just either put a random tag team together or split up a well-oiled tag team that have been together for many years. You hear FTR have talked about it in interviews, who are a tag team with WWE, who were known as with AEW, who were known as the Revival in WWE. That got really confusing for a second. So yeah, I would just be very curious to know why doesn't he like tag team wrestling? Is it because of the old cliche, tag team wrestling costs more because you have to pay for 4 superstars instead of 2? Is it something that goes back in his own history? Is there a popular reason? Like, does he feel like tag team wrestling doesn't earn enough money? Like, I don't know. I'd just be very curious to know, why doesn't he like tag team wrestling? Number 7, and I don't know if I'd say this one to his face, but I'd be very curious to know, why do you think the WWE struggles in this day and age to make new stars? Is it that the fans just don't give stuff time to breathe and connect with? Is it that WWE is too focused on popping ratings rather than building long-term stories and stars? Does he plan on making it? Or is it purely that he doesn't want to, because when he's made big stars in the past, they've left the company and gone on to bigger and maybe better things? I don't know. I'd just be very curious to ask him that question. Number 6 is, in your mind, what is the worst wrestling segment? As wrestling fans, we all know that in WWE and other promotions, there have been some terrible wrestling segments. From Katie Vick, I'm not going to go into what that is, but you know what that is, to Trish Stratus bark like a dog, to in other companies like Claire Lynch, that storyline in TNA, what's it called? The Finger Poke of Doom in WCW. I am sure I can think of others. Warriors promo in WCW, etc. But I'd be very curious to know what is, in Vince McMahon's mind, the worst wrestling segment of all time. Number 5 is what do you know about life outside of wrestling? Simply, we have all heard from people that have conducted interviews or before or after they've left WWE that wrestling is Vince McMahon's life, and he doesn't really know anything about what goes on outside of wrestling. For example, he was eating a burrito every day but didn't know what it was called. Like when they were talking about burritos, he turned around and went, "What's a burrito?" He seems to be behind several trends. Like if a trend's happening, WWE will start that trend 5 to 10 years later. So I'd just be very curious to know, what does he know about life outside of wrestling? Number 4 is, who was your favourite wrestler as a child, and who is your favourite wrestler now? Simply put, I'd be very curious to know what kind of fan Vince was as a child, who was his favourite wrestler growing up, who did he want to be like growing up, and now I would be very curious to know who his favourite wrestler is now in the company. Obviously, is it the guy that makes him the most money? Is it a guy he has a personal connection with? Etc. I'd just be very curious to know. And following on from that theme, I'd be very curious to know, number 3, what was your favourite wrestling match as a child, and what is your favourite wrestling match now? Again, I'd be very curious to know what kind of fan Vince was as a child, what matches did he enjoy, and again, what kind of matches does he love being seen put on now? Number 2 is, who takes over WWE after you? I'd be very curious to know, A, who does Vince have in mind to take over WWE? We as fans all assume that because of his work with NXT, it's going to be Triple H. Does he have someone else in mind, like Bruce Pritchard or Kevin Dunn or Shane and Stephanie? Or does he just have someone completely different in mind? I'd just be very curious to know who takes over WWE in Vince's mind when he either passes away or retires. And on that note, speaking of which, number 1 is, will you ever retire? Personally, I can't see Vince McMahon ever retiring. He is known as a workaholic in wrestling. He is known as everything he does, it turns out that he will work stupid hours, he'll work out as stupid hours, etc. But I'd be very curious to know, does Vince ever see himself retiring? So yeah. Okay guys, that's it basically. Comment below, what questions would you love to ask Vince McMahon? And I'll see you in the next one. And please like, share and subscribe. I'd love to hit 300 subscribers before my birthday on March 29th. So if you like this video, please subscribe, and bye-bye.